My name is Andrii, correctly pronounced. Thank you very much. And today I'm going to talk about platform engineering. And I really hope I don't have to lean into this microphone. So how this talk's structured, I'm going to start by answering the why question. Why is platform engineering even being talked about? What is a problem that platform engineers are trying to address? Then I'm going to talk about the how, about the way of working for platform teams. And I'm going to share my experiences as a platform engineer at KPN within the last 2 years. Usually, I would start by defining what platform engineering is. However, there is no universally accepted definition of platform engineering. So instead, I'm going to quote some industry leaders. So for example, Google engineers claim that platform engineering is a backbone of modern software engineering. Well, it's actually modern software delivery. I misquoted it there. In turn, they refer to Cloud Native Computing Foundation for the definition, which is a little bit more complex. They call it integrated collection of capabilities defined and presented according to the needs of platform users. Yeah, it's very clear, very concise. I understood none of it. My absolute favorite definition comes from Microsoft. It's really short, it's really concise. I'll just leave it for you to read. Right, yeah, well, me too, Chloe. So what is poorly defined or not defined at all? But platform teams exist. So they answer some question. They answer the question of why is platform engineering? I have a speculation to offer, so don't really quote me, don't at me. Over the past 15 years, we've seen the shift in the industry from software engineering being focused on just working on the code and works in my machine, and the moment you're done with the code, you just throw it over to QA or deployment, database administrators, and monitoring team, and you don't have to care what happens afterward. This has shifted towards software developers taking on these responsibilities. Shifted gradually, but it's definitely here to stay. And, well, that's what DevOps is all about. So this is actually a bait and switch. This is talk about DevOps. Are you a software engineer with Pager? You're doing DevOps. Are you writing CodeQL to check whether your code is secure? You're a DevOps. Did you configure a Grafana dashboard recently? You're a DevOps. This is all DevOps process. It's about shifting left towards the developer, shifting all these responsibilities towards the developer. But it turns out that following these principles is hard. We're trained to write code. We're not really trained to observe, to monitor, to make these kinds of decisions. And there's a lot of choice to be made. And on the other end, the businesses want consistency. They don't want a variety of tools because the diversity of tooling, as it turns out, is quite expensive. You get bulk discounts. So thinking about the choices that every developer nowadays has to have in a modern repository, before starting working on a project, you have to decide on what package manager you're going to use. This is Python specific, but you have to think, is it going to be Poetry, PipTools? Are you going to use Rye? Are you going to use Conda? Are you going to use UV or PyEnv? Maybe you're a NixOS fan. I hope not, but What about CI? Are you going to use Drone? Are you going to use GitHub Actions? Are you Team Jenkins? I mean, I know I am. I have a Jenkins sticker there. Unfortunately. Circle CI? Maybe? How are you going to deploy? Are you going to deploy in Kubernetes? Elastic Computing Service? Fly.io? Maybe you're going to, just roll out an instance, deploy to VM. Are you going to check your code quality with Snyk, SamGraph, CodeQL, Veracode, Trufflehog? Some of these names are made up. What about observability? CloudWatch? ElkStack? Prometheus? Loki? Tempo? Who comes up with these names anyway? The point I'm trying to make is that freedom has a cost. Freedom of choice has a cost. Developers spend more time discussing what is the observability tool I'm going to use, what is the log collector tool I'm going to use, instead of thinking about the customer. And once a choice is made, it's the company's responsibility to support that choice. So there is an actual financial cost to it. And from a system design perspective, the diversity of choice makes a system more complex to reason about. So this is where the platform teams step in. And how do they, well, us, how do we do it? It's not that different from a normal development process. You observe common patterns and potential inefficiencies. You try to incorporate best practices from upstream, which in my case means I just spend a lot of time on discourse.python.org and just read all the things that people post. And of course, you read all the release notes. You try to ingest all of that information out in the wild and find the gems that you can apply in your work. And then you execute by shipping tools and services and documentation and talking to people, which I'm not going to talk about. That's a software engineering work there. And then you have to do one more step. You have to collect feedback. And that means reaching out to teams and also sometimes observing how their work changed. And that you don't really see directly. You have to look at how their code changes changed. How's the workflow changing? What is the feedback from POs? And what is the stability of the service they provide? And this is on the loop. So this is rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And if we dive a little bit into specifics, did I hit the mic? Our products can be roughly categorized as following. So we write documentation, which is guides, tutorials, RFCs, how-tos. We support a self-service portal. If you're familiar with Spotify Backstage, we sort of have a version of that, which we started in parallel. I regret to inform that it's much worse than Backstage. So use Backstage if possible. We write project templates, sort of boilerplate code for teams to start with. And we provide APIs and associated tools. Now, in this talk, because I only have 30 minutes, I'd like to focus on the boilerplates and the APIs and ignore the documentation, like I always do, and ignore the self-service portal, because it's horrible JavaScript there. So what is our kind of niche? We want to provide teams with reasonable defaults so that don't end up in paralysis analysis, want to eliminate unnecessary duplication of work, and we would like to ensure some level of consistency. Now, I'm not saying that we force people to use only specific set of tools, but we prefer to nudge them in that direction. And we also have stakeholders who are not just developers, but we also have compliance, security teams that really want things to be according to security principles, audit teams, etc. And we have other platform teams that take care of things for us, and we also take care of things for them. So think about our team, which is oriented towards Python developers, but we also have Kubernetes team. We have CI/CD teams that provide Jenkins as a service and provide Kubernetes as a service, etc., etc. Now to the actual examples. I still have 15 minutes. That's great. I'm almost on time. First, let's talk about what we deal with. So our code base, our developers. Our developers are working on all the services and endpoints behind API KPN.com. This is a set of endpoints powering not only mykpn.com, which some of you are familiar with, but also business-to-business applications, and also a lot of internal tooling. There's more than 160 services. They're supported by more than 300 developers, working on 500 repositories. Yes, it's a horrible number. And it's around 3 million lines of Python code. So it's not a huge code base by modern standards, but it is a lot of developer activity and a lot of opportunities to improve developer life. And before anyone asks, we have 6 million lines of YAML. We're doing DevOps, okay? Right, project templates. So project templates is what every page about platform engineering will start with. You have to provide a golden path, some way for teams to kickstart a project, to give them a competitive advantage over other teams that don't use a template. We really want teams to spend as little time as possible in the initial stages of the project. So take away the need to make the choice, but don't take away the possibility of making choices. We know that in an industry it's referred as a golden path, or we prefer to call it paved path, but it's basically a set of tools and services that we have chosen as supported. So everything outside of that paved path, the teams are on their own. So how we do it? We have a separate repository with all the templates that are powered by Cookie Cutter. The teams are free to go into that repo, start a CI/CD pipeline, answer a couple of questions, and they will have their repository created for them. Sounds very straightforward in theory, but in practice, it became a little bit of a nightmare to support. So when we started the Cookie Cutter back in 2015, way before I joined KPN, it started with just one simple project, one simple layout. A little bit further, we started adding more and more and more things, such as, for example, adding a Django template, having two different kinds of projects. Then we added Fast API and AAO HTTP. Then we redid the Django. We had two versions of Django template over the course of time. We even had some weird Kafka library template, which I don't know how it ended up here, since all of our services are HTTP driven. But over time, we have made 827 code changes in 9 years. And that's about a change every other working day. Don't check the math. I'm sure it checks out. Anyway, it's a mess, because at every point in time, you can spun off a new project, and you never know. You never know actually where and when and how it was started. To summarize, we have 3 templates: Django, Fast API, and a package, with lots of code duplication between them, because at the end of the day, they do have to duplicate the code. And because we allowed teams to push as many changes as they would like, we have a lot of code that is very specific to a tiny minority of projects. So remember when I said 500 repositories, we have some code that is only relevant to 8 repositories in that template. So that means a new project starts, and the first thing they do after generating the bare bones project is deleting code, which I love, but I don't think our developers love it. So a word of warning: if you ever end up in this situation, be very strict about your templates. Really try to weigh in the contributions from the teams. And the Cookie Cutter itself has a major downside. So Cookie Cutter is, for those of you who are not familiar, is a wrapper around around Jinja. And basically what it does, it treats a file system as an input for Jinja templates. So of course you can template your files, but you can also template your file system. But it is not aware of the changes that are made in the Cookie Cutter itself, nor is it aware of the changes that are made in the project that it generated. Which means over time, as you delete files, rename files, move files around, the Cookie Cutter will continue generating files where you already moved them, or it will not notify you when you delete a file. But we still manage to use it for some positives, even though applying these kinds of changes incrementally is frankly painful. Should have gotten some water. That's on me. So how do we use this Cookie Cutter? For example, one of the first things I did when I joined was trying to consolidate the way we organize our dependencies. So before I joined, the mishmash of pip tools, setup tools, and just bare requirements.txt approach was used across the repositories. This is not the modern Python anymore. We have to use PyProject TOML because this is what the PAP tells us to do. And also, frankly, it does make easier to reason about new repositories. So instead of a variety of ways that your dependencies can be defined and your build tools can be defined, everything is neatly packaged into one TOML file. And as part of it, I also wanted to push for a more modern package manager. Now, in retrospect, pushing for two things at the same time may not have been the best idea, but we did it anyway. And here's the results. 2 years in, we have 99 repositories who moved to PyProject TOML and Poetry out of 500. Now, it may sound like not so much of a success, but within the platform teams, it's the common understanding is that it's going to take a lot of time for all the teams to adopt the positive changes. And not all of the teams have to adopt these changes, as long as they're comfortable with supporting what works for them. We're not there to beat them into submission. We're there to help them and support them. We also added Renovate, which had a much higher rate of adoption. And I do recommend for those of you who are not familiar with Renovate or Dependapod to look into those tools as a way to ease the process of updating dependencies. So what we've observed across our repositories is that some teams would never update their dependencies, and I mean never, and some teams would run custom CI/CD jobs that would update all of the dependencies in one big swoop once a week or sometimes once a month, which is also not ideal because it really removes the incremental change out of your dependency management. Where was I? Yes, another fun topic for me was namespace packages. Turns out that KPN, for one reason or another, really likes namespace packages. And in general, I would say it's a great idea, except we, in Python world, have 3 different competing implementations of namespace packages, which makes it very easy to upgrade from one to another. That's sarcasm. So in our case, within KPN, all of our namespace packages, which totaled around 300 packages, we're using package resources. At a certain point in November 2022, package resources was officially deprecated, which means it's going to be removed at a certain point in future. So how do you then move forward? Well, templates to the rescue. Of course, we just remove the package resources use, and everything that used to be a namespace package is now still a namespace package, but complying with PEP 420. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, Cookie Cutter doesn't inform you when something is removed, so people would regenerate, reapply the template, and they would not be aware that init.py file was removed. So this has caused some very curious failures where you wouldn't be able to actually track down what happened, because PEP 420, package util, and package resources take slightly different approaches in how they implement the namespace packages. At the end of the day, they all manipulate the Python path, but in incompatible ways. You can read more about it on Python Packaging Authority, about the compatibility metrics of these tools. But it is fairly complicated. And since I'm 20 minutes in, and I have 5 minutes to wrap it off, I'd like to stop talking about the templates, and I'm going to jump into the APIs and tools that we provide with one example, and hopefully I'll be able to finish it within 5 minutes. There it goes. So originally in 2015, the applications behind API KPN.com were a big Django monolith, just a humongous code base that started sort of slowly moving towards a microservice approach. And as they moved towards a microservice approach, the question of authorization came into play. Because this monolith already implemented an identity server as an OpenID Connect, it was a natural decision to continue leverage it for machine-to-machine or service-to-service authentication. However, one thing that was neglected at that point in time was the fact that supporting this was done through Django admin. So all of the scope requests and access control was done through Django admin. What it led towards was this abomination of chat ops. This is not really chat ops. I'm being, again, sarcastic. What this actually looked like for the team is that every day you would get 5, 6, sometimes 20 messages on their Slack channel asking, please add scope. Which scopes do I use? How do I protect my things? What is my client ID? Where are my client credentials? Client credentials were sent over email. The scopes would be added for teams that didn't need those scopes, et cetera, et cetera. And this is my view on this. Every time I would go to that channel, this is exactly how it looked to me. Scope, please give me scope. So one team was drowning in chat ops. The teams had no visibility of what are you accessing, what are my control lists. There was no accountability because, again, one team was permitting access from service to service. So teams sometimes would not be aware that their API was being consumed by a different service. And there was no transparency, which is, as you remember, we have compliance on our behinds, and they don't really like when there is no transparency. So what we ended up doing was creating an API and ensuring that people can use more YAML. I'll jump into that. So we really wanted to make sure that access can be declared through declarative means and controlled through a repository. So there was some accountability as to who requested and when they requested based on the Git history. We would love to empower maintainers of the applications to actually approve access to their applications, and platform, us, would actually approve the applications. So it wasn't just a random person popping up on Slack and saying, hey, I want to approve an application. We introduced some kind of auditability in there. And we use CI/CD pipeline to actually check whether the application can access things, whether all the accesses are approved. And from a developer perspective, it looked like more YAML. We're doing DevOps after all, so YAML all the way. You would request a scope if you need to access something, and you would claim that you're protecting your resources using this specific scope. That's pretty much all of it. Of course, in real world, this YAML is hundreds of lines long because some of our services have hundreds of endpoints, and each endpoint has its own scope. And in the pipeline itself, we would first verify that the YAML is correct, as in checks out. We would update, as in submit that overview YAML. And we would, before the deployment of the application, we would verify that all the access requests were approved. Yeah, I'm 1 minute away, so thanks to Fast API. I did say that I'm going to fumble at least one slide. I fumbled this slide. So we use Fast API, we use SQL Alchemy. Much love for those projects. Async, simply because we had a lot of requests that we needed to send out to actually orchestrate this. But I have opinions about async that are not going to fit into 30 minutes. So I don't really have any advice or any deep thoughts that I can share with you. So instead, I'll just say thank you.